And we're back. And it's COMP305. It's winter 2016, and it's week 9, part 1 of our broadcast. And I'll put that up as a broadcast in a second. All right. So last we left off, we were working on this demo where we were doing an FPS, or first-person perspective, actually, a 3D demo, right? And for those people who were somehow not following along, let's pull it up. So if I go to GitHub Centennial, and I look at some of the, when GitHub comes up, and if I look at some of the repos, one of them is COMP305 Winter 2016 3D game demo. This one is the one I was working on, and I'm going to continue it today, but I'm going to make a new scene. So instead of like deleting what we had before or changing what we had before, we're going to make a new scene in here. So let's bring that up. So I'm going to open this one. I remember where we left off last time. We had made this maze tile. That's what we had done, right? Maze tile. And if I zoom in, you know, all we have is, you know, a couple of things here with our maze that we kind of put together really quickly. You know, and when I start playing this thing, you've got your basic character controller, and with the maze the way we've got it, right? It's pretty bright. And then we get, let's say, to the end of the maze afterwards, after you make your traps and whatever, and then, you know, we're done, let's say, right? I mean, you can make your maze as big as you want. I recommend making it, like right now, my maze is a group of tiles. Each tile is 16 by 16, which means it's about 32 by 32 right now, but I recommend making it bigger than this to make it more interesting. Let's make a new scene. So we're going to say File, New Scene. And we're going to call this thing, if we save the scene, save scene as, we're going to save the scene inside our scenes folder. And we're going to call this scene 2. Right? It's just a, you know, kind of make it different than scene 1. Okay, so in our scene 2, we have 2 scenes now. We have main and scene 2. We can have as many scenes as we want. Each scene is its own world. Okay, that's what I want you to think about it as. I want you to think of each scene as its own game, if you want it to be, right? So just like we did with the other, with our other projects before that, we've only focused on one scene, right? And our UI tools we made, again, it only takes us from, you know, we don't have one scene to take us into the other scene. We don't do that, but we can do that. Here in this scene, what we're going to be doing is we're going to make a new, something new that we didn't do before, right? But in order for us to make things work, what I want you to do is import some more assets. It's going to bloat our project a little bit more, but hey, that's what we do, right? So I'm going to go to Assets, follow along, please. And I'm going to go to Import Package. And if you notice, there's a bunch of them, right? Right now we've done characters. That's the one we've imported so far. I want you to import environment. Okay, so go to environment now. This takes a bit of time. And notice that there's some other things here. There's some stuff that we didn't include. Like, for example, notice that some sprites, like button accelerator in our environment and so on, lots of stuff is deactivated here. And be very careful. This stuff here, that stuff that's unchecked right here, is part of is already in our standard assets. Notice that's where they are, right? It kind of knows where Unity has imported everything. Leave those alone where they are. Don't you know, don't check those out. I mean, otherwise what it'll do is it'll write over what we've already done, right? Notice there's new assets that we're downloading. One of them is speed tree. We want to definitely get that one. All the terrain assets here, we want to get those, as well as water and other things as well. So make sure you get all these bottom pieces, these standard assets down here. Those are the ones we want to kind of have imported, right? So leave, if it shows you this, it shows you unchecked, leave it unchecked. Don't try and re-import anything. Just these new standard assets. We'll have to check. You know, again, you know, you don't want to re-import everything you don't need. For now, I'm just going to click import for me. Only the new stuff. but it's going to create a new folder for me after I import things. Notice that there's lots of stuff coming on. These are standard assets again that everybody who has Unity has. All right, this is not something that you have to download, right, from the asset store. And when I finish, this is a great way of importing stuff that we can use as as almost like prototypes. Okay, so I got my standard assets here. Looks like I got a whole section called environment. What do I want to do? I want to move my environment assets, right? Because this is the only thing I have in this environment folder. I want to move this environment folder inside my underscore standard assets folder, right? So because I've got this other folder here that I made, and I just want to move this one in here. Okay, so it's just going to move them in there, and then I can get rid of this extra folder. So I don't have to have two standard assets, just one. Delete. So what I have here is, notice I have standard assets where I have environment, my physics materials, and so on. And environment gives me some additional prefabs and some other things that I can use that I didn't have before. Okay, cool. So that's number one. Two, I'm going to add a new game object to the game. Right-click. And if I go to 3D object, I got some options. One of them is terrain. Let's add terrain. Now, the terrain we're going to add here, if you notice, I'm just going to zoom away from it, is massive, right? It's like massive. It's like a square kilometer. It's 10 kilometers, something like that, right? Guys and girls, please, this is really huge. Like this little piece, this looks like it's small, but really, it's massive, right? So we need to change this up. So if we click here on the right, it tells us a couple things, right? We have some new controls. We have a transform like we always have. We have something called a terrain collider, which is new. We've never seen that before. And we have this new section over here for terrain, right? If I hover over these little tools here, right? Like, if I go over into this, they don't do anything. But if I click on them at all, if I click on this one, it says raise lower. The first one is a raise lower tool, right? The second one here is a paint height. We're going to talk about that for a second. The next one is our smooth height. Then there's our paint texture. There's all kinds of stuff we're going to do. Place trees, right? Paint details. And this last one, if I click onto it, gives us the terrain itself. And one thing to notice is how big the terrain can be, right? Here's my terrain width. And by the way, these are in 500 meters. So this thing is like 500 meters square. This is crazy. It's massive. Let's please reduce this to something reasonable, to 50 by 50, let's say. That's 50 meters is plenty. So we'll go 50. We'll change this to 50. You're going to see even that's big. 50 meters by 50 meters, something that's small, all right? Now again, you can make this big as you want, but I recommend making it small. Let's just click on the terrain and press F for frame select mode. And then I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit, just a little bit. And I'm going to click the Q button. The Q button here makes the hand go on. Remember, these buttons up here, they're all with some letters, right? So Q, W, E, R, T, right? All those buttons do different things, right? So Q, right? Give me my hand, and when I come back down here, and you can see that this is the terrain. Okay, it looks like just a plane, but it's not. It's a terrain. And what it allows us to do, which is a little different than we've seen before, is it allows us to sculpt what this thing looks like. Okay, sculpt, and I mean it. Like we'll be able to draw it out. So how do we do such a thing? So first of all, in order for us to visualize what's happening, it would be nice, right, to paint some grass, right? And if I notice it here, if I click on paint, right, and notice that I want to, I have textures. Here's my different kinds of brushes, right? One of them is I have to click on this edit textures because there's no terrain textures defined. First thing you notice is if I want to paint something on here, right? Right now I have my standard brush. Notice my brush is like this, right? But I don't have any textures to paint. Textures mean images. Imagine if I'm painting or stamping slowly these images all over the terrain, right? Okay, so what I want to do is click Edit Textures. Okay, I want to click Add Textures. Okay, cool. Well, I don't have really a texture, and if the only way I can do that is to click, select. Notice that there's a ton of textures here that I can select already, right? Some things that I've already included, right, in my terrain. So if I can go through here and I'll look down here, there's conifer, there's grass of different kinds, grass hill, grass rocky, albedo. Let's grab the grass hill, for example, right? So this is my grass hill. It's built in. These are textures that I don't have to download from anywhere, right? There's also other ones. There's gravel cobble, the one we had before, remember, that we used for our other terrain. It's there because it affects all terrains, right? And there's other ones. Okay, so let's just use the grass hill albedo. Albedo, again, is kind of a way of saying that this is a diffuse terrain as opposed to a specular one. Okay, so we're clicking that on. And now we're not done yet. We also have to think about the size, right? And this size, by the way, 15 by 15 is 15 by 15 in terms of how many times it repeats, right? So that's how often, once I paint, you'll see some repetitiveness as I go through this whole thing, right? Okay, that's cool. Let us leave it this way and click Add. Notice that when I did that, my whole entire field became a grassy field. And there's some repetitiveness. Look at the repetitiveness, right? You can see this right away, right? Hey, let's leave it as is for a second, right? And remember that I'm going to click away from this now. So I've got my terrain, click away. I'm going to go into characters again. Here's my characters, right? And remember that in my characters, I have a first-person character controller, just like we did already. Here's my prefab from my FPS controller prefab. We haven't changed this up at all, right, from the first scene, right? Let's drag this FPS controller prefab onto our terrain. And I'm just going to kind of drag it over here. Here's my FPS controller prefab. I'm going to kind of frame select, go into it a little bit. Oops. And I'm going to click the W button so I can pull it out a little bit. So make sure that on the top that my when I'm grabbing and selecting, right? And again, I'm looking at this from a perspective mode. But if I grab from the top, right, or from the green arrow and up and down, I definitely want my capsule not to be somewhere in the ground like this, right? I want it to be up above the ground. So make sure it's above the ground. Okay, and let's press play. So it's just all I've done is this. Hey, there's my guy, and we got a couple problems. So we're gonna fix this. But look I just made a 50 by 50 meter terrain, the ground, right? And if I walk, I still have the same kind of stuff as before. Hey, how come my sound's not working? My sound's not working, guys. What's going on? How come it's not working? Anybody? Can't have two cameras or you can have two cameras, but you can't have two sound. There's cameras also come up with there's a bit of a sound component that the camera has, right? And let me show you this thing. If I go to my FPS controller underneath my FPS first-person character, which is really my player camera, let's just rename this thing to player camera, right? And this is actually my player, like we did before. I can even tag this person as a player, right? There is my player. There you go. One thing you notice underneath this is that it has an audio source, right? It has an audio source. My player has an audio source. My camera has an audio listener. I can have as many audio sources as I want, but I can only have one audio listener in the scene. And in fact, I have this extra camera component up here, which is the main camera. I don't need it anymore. So let's get rid of it. So we kind of right click onto it, delete. And now if I press play, I hear that normal sound, right? So if I press escape here and I'm going to increase the volume just a touch so you guys can hear what I'm talking about here. And if I walk around now, I get that same footstep stuff, right? And that's my terrain, yeah.
There's no video on the sound.
What do you mean? Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Oh, that's bad. Who knows why that's happening? Maybe I didn't share everything like I did last time. Well, let's try that again. How about now? So let's go back. So that means I have to show you all that again. I love it. Well, that's why I have the video and I'm videoing, right? Same time. It's bizarre. How about now? Is there sound now? Is there video now? There should be video now. All right, so let's do all that again, just so that way, you know, it's recorded properly, because the people are going to go back and going to go, what the hell, right? One thing I did do is just for people who are listening but not seeing, I was able to add in another FPS component. But what I did was, for people who are watching live, I went to Assets, I went to Import Package, and I imported my environment package, right? After I imported it, I put it into my underscore, the actual environment, the environment folder that came with it. I put that into this other standard assets, which I put it with an underscore. So it's on the top of my assets, so it doesn't confuse us where we're getting these assets from, right? Because we have two sets of assets. And I don't want to mix up the standard assets with my assets for the game, right? All right, so that's one thing I did. The next thing I did was I created this terrain. But let's make that terrain again. So I'm going to kind of get rid of it, right? So I can show you guys this on live, because this is what the main part of this example is, right? So let's get rid of the terrain. So I'm going to right-click on the terrain, get rid of it, delete. It's gone. And let's make a new terrain. So I'm going to go right-click, and I'm going to say 3D object, terrain, and then there it is. It's massive. It's like 500 meters by 500 meters. We can't use this thing. So I'm going to click on this right gear here in the terrain component. So the terrain is exactly like a regular game object. It has a transform, it has a collider, and it has a special component called the terrain component. And if I click on this gear over here, it gives me additional properties that are built into the terrain. One of them is how big it is, and the terrain is 500 by 500, right? So let's get rid of that and go 50 by 50. Let's make it a little bit shorter so we can deal with it for now, right? 50 by 50. So smaller, 50 meters by 50 meters is what this is. If I kind of focus in on it, if I click on terrain and press F for frame select, I can see a little bit closer. There it is. Now what I want to do is I want to paint a texture on this terrain. I want to make it so that I can't do a material. It's not like before. Terrains are special. They're special game objects, right? I don't necessarily put materials on them. I paint terrains on them. It's a different thing. So the first thing we're going to do is let's paint a texture. And so we can see this thing. And what we're going to do is we're going to edit textures in order for us to do that. Click the Edit Textures button. That's what I did. And I want to add a texture. And I want to choose that grass texture again. It's called, if I go back down here, if I can see there's a bunch of textures that come up. One of them is this grass hill albedo, which I'm going to click on. And then click away. And then click Add. When I do that, by default, it does this, right? This is my grass terrain. If you notice, it looks like just regular grass, right? I've got my player, I kind of dragged onto the scene, which is just an FPS controller. That's all it is. I want to click play. I've got this, right? So I'm on the scene, and I can walk around. But my terrain is pretty boring, right? We want to make it more exciting. So we're going to do some sculpting. So I'm going to go back to my terrain now that I can see it. And notice that there is something called raise lower. The first one is called raise lower. If I quiz you on this next day, by the way, because there's going to be a quiz tomorrow, right? And ask you questions. There's going to be questions about this stuff, right? That I'm going to talk about today, right? So let's talk about this. So the first one is this raise lower control. And the raise lower control, what it does is I can lower or raise the terrain. Let's try this out. So here's my brush, and if I click onto it, I can make like this crazy mountain. Click over here, and you know, like these are like I don't know, devil peaks, right? They're like horns, right? If I don't like that, I can just undo, just like normal. That's really crazy. That's really strong. So how do I control that, right? Well, there's two things. Brush size is down here as a control, right? Actually, there's a bunch of things to think about. One is what kind of brush am I using? Like for example, if I'm using this kind of brush or this kind of brush, different kinds of brushes allow you to do different kinds of effects, right? So if I go with a solid brush like this, notice that it's much larger and solid, right? And something else, there is the brush size. I can go 100, right? So it's quite big, right? Quite a big, kind of a big brush. And I want to start big and then move smaller, right? So that's the first thing. The second one is opacity. Now, opacity, in your mind, when you think about it, it's like, can I see through the terrain? What does that mean when I see through the terrain? But here, when we brush, opacity means how strong my brush is. How how much can I put into my brush to make it so that it is, strong or weak? Okay, like I mean, how much am I going to mold my terrain? The bigger the number, if I make my opacity like 100, and if I click onto it, you can see that it's like it'll make squares all over the place. Like that's how strong it is. Boop, right? And it, if I kind of make it, it'll be like just crazy, wacky, out of this world kind of terrain, right? Which is way too much, right? So we want to reduce this because we want to be subtle when we create stuff. Undo, undo, undo. We'll undo them all, right? So they're back to this, right? What I want to do is reduce my brush so that my opacity way down. So let's say like something like 10 or 9, right? And now when I brush, right? If I use this kind of brush, which is, notice it's very circular, that doesn't make any sense, right? It's going to make crop circles. If I want to make like alien landing spots, this makes sense, right? If I want to make a plateau, I can just keep brushing and I can do something like this, no problem. It takes 2 seconds to make a mountain, right? But they're very squarish mountains, right? If I want to take this away, I can right-click, right? I right-click and do it. How do I take this away now? Well, if you press the Shift key while you brush with the left click, I can just reduce all this again, just back to normal. So I can reduce these areas here if I press the Shift key while I do the brushing, right? To kind of brush away these areas. Okay, so basic brushing controls. So again, brush, it's almost like wax on, wax off, right? So if I want to brush and build stuff, I can press the left click, just left click and brush on that thing with this particular brush. If I shift left click, right, shift click, then I can reduce, right? Until things are back to nothing, if I want to. There we go. So back to normal. Okay. Things to note. I can never make something lower than the base level of the terrain. So this base level of terrain is the lowest level. I can make things higher, but I can't make things lower. So if I want to make a river, right, or some kind of water mass inside my terrain, like a lake, how do I do that? I've got to raise the entire terrain first, right, a certain level, and then lower other places back down to the base level, okay? That's how I do it. I can never come lower than this, though. This is the lowest level. Now, normally I said, like when it comes to Unity, we don't actually build things. We import them, and you can. If I want to make a terrain in Maya or some other program, Maya Mudbox, as an example, is a great program to make terrains with, even Maya itself, or if I want to use something like Blender to make my own terrain, I can do that, right? And there's some great tools to do that in those programs. But this is the one tool that's built into Unity that I like, that you can make terrains very, very quick. And this is for your 3D game. Instead of making some kind of geometric kind of game where we have a very square area, you can make a terrain. Or, which I hope you will do, mix and match. Some of this, some of that, make it more interesting so that's your own game. All right, so let's debate just general principles. So again, different brushes that kind of draw different things. So if you notice, if I went back to the original brush that I had, right, my brush is very big, and but what I can do is, and this is what I recommend, and you can also change your perspective again, so you can see the bumpiness of the terrain. If I want to make a very hilly area, that's even that is way too strong, right? Why? Because my strength, even my opacity as it is still too much. I want to reduce this even lower, like lower, lower, lower. So I'm going to undo, right? But what I want to do is I want to just touch your terrain, okay? Don't brush your terrain like this. It becomes too unnatural, right? But if I just touch my terrain as I build, it's an iterative process. I build almost like I'm sculpting. Imagine if you have sand, right? And I just put a little bit of sand so I can build up my sand castle. And I build a little bit more and a little bit more to make it more natural. Because if I just paint, it looks ugly. It doesn't look realistic. So let's try this out as a team. Go together on this thing and just gently just touch the areas that you want to increase. Really reduce your opacity down. Like I'm at my opacity at 5 here. And just touch the areas to kind of build up a natural areas of height before we get into our big height. that we're going to talk about. Now you notice that the hills look more natural. Let's try and run the game now to see what we've got so far, right? And see what effects this has on our player. There you go. Not bad. So it's a bit of hilly area. Still, kind of, you know, I can see that I can go up and down. And this is the great thing about terrain. The terrain collider adapts to the new things I've drawn. Right? It's pretty natural and pretty long, right? And I was able to do that in like 2 seconds, right? It was no time. Okay, that's nice, but I want to make some rivers or something else there, right? I want to add some other things in the terrain. So how do I do that? Well, let's escape here, stop playing this one, and I want to make a base level for the terrain. So the first one does raise lower. The second one here, which is the next brush, does paint height. Notice that my opacity is 5 and my height is 10. Okay, what does this mean? Well, paint height takes me to that exact height. In this particular case, I don't mind using this bigger brush, this different brush, right? And what I want to do is just do exactly that. So just paint the height. Now notice it goes to 10, right? And it stops at 10. So if I was to, you know, again, if I was to look around, notice that this is a height of 10. And if I brush everything the same, right, over time, like this, notice that it'll all go to a height of 10. Everything. It'll stop at 10 exactly, right? If I click the flatten button, right, everything will be at the exact same height. This is a height of 10 now. If I click the flatten button, I don't have to do this painting. And if I was to do more, I can't add more to it anymore because we're at a height of 10. This means 10 meters. 10 meters. Be careful, right? Okay, now that I have a height of 10, right? And by the way, that's why I use brush size of 100 here. Again, you can be as subtle here or as brash as you want. Let's go back to our first one for a second now, and let's go back to this one. Okay, so I want to start carving out an area here where my river is going to be. All right, but instead of pressing the shift, just the regular left mouse button, I want to press the shift left mouse button, and I'm going to start. Now remember, my character is over here on the left corner, right? That's where he's going to be, right? And where's my character? He's way down here. Why? Because this level here, right, is 10 meters above him right now. So if I click on my player, you can see that his Y height is 3. If I want to make it the same level, I should put it kind of like up here. Well, that's my directional light. I'll do that. I meant my player. My Y height is like 0.9. Let's make it 10. And you can see that, or let's make it a little bit higher so he drops a little bit, 12. You can see now that at 12, he's 12 meters above the baseline, which is 0. Let's move into there to see where he is. I'm going to do frame select mode to go see him. There he is. And if I press play, there's no difference, right? He's just going to drop into the same thing. There's no difference for him. We can't tell from a game perspective what's going on. But when we sculpt, if I go back to my terrain and zoom out again, right? And kind of move my perspective around. Okay, I want to draw this river that goes from here, let's say, to there, right? So I'm going to press shift click, and I'm going to lower the terrain now, right? To draw this depression slowly, where this river, I don't want to do too much because it'll look unnatural, right? But I want to draw this depression, there we go, really deep there, that's too deep, right? And sometimes it's also best to look at it from a different angle, so I'm just going to move it up. Okay. Use the hand control here to pull this up. Oop. Hand control to pull it over a little bit so you can see it. I'm going to still draw it over here. Okay, so let's just keep drawing. So I'm going to go back to my terrain controls, look at this one, shift click, and just continue to, you know, depress the river so it kind of makes this snaky path to make it look like a river, right? And rivers usually have branches, right? Like one of these, almost like the branches of a tree, right? So you can see how I'm drawing my terrain, nothing fancy. Okay, so that's the lowest level now of my terrain. And if I was to look at this thing from underneath, you can see that there's areas that are really deep, right? And it's hard to see. Notice the terrain is only one-sided. Why? Because the back face is culled. We don't care about the other side. All we care about is this side of the terrain. Okay. All right, cool. So that's where the river's going to be. Well, you know what? It doesn't make sense that this green grass is inside the river. So let's paint it differently. let's make it muddy, right? How do we do that? I'm going to go back to my next one, which is this one. And this one here is the texture painting one, right? Like we did before. Again, remember, the opacity is the strength, right? In terms of how much it's going to paint. We can keep this low. See how my opacity, my brush size is big right now, but my opacity is darn low. 5, and my target strength is 0.4. It's really low. If you make this bigger, it's going to be too much. This is more subtle, the lower it is, because all I'm doing is adding to the current, what's currently being seen. So let's add a new texture. So I'm going to click Edit Textures. I'm going to click Add Texture. And in my Add Texture, I'm going to click another one. So let's say click Select. And notice that if I scroll down here, there's some other ones that have grass, but there's something called Mud, Rocky, Albedo, Specular, right? This one, Mud, Rocky, Albedo, Mud. There's my Mud, Rocky, Albedo. I'll click that on, no problem, I like that. I'll leave it the same thing. I'm not going to change any of this. And click Add. Now I have two. I have this one, right? And I have this one. If I want to paint with this one, I got to click onto it. And now what I want to do, leave the same brush on, right? But I want to zoom in here so I can see what's going on, right? So I want to kind of change my perspective a little bit, zoom in. So I want to zoom into this area where I'm going to start painting. And just so I can see what's happening, I'm just going to click onto it a little bit all the time. And if you see, notice now how I can make this area up here different by painting a different texture. And if I don't like this texture, if I think it's not enough or it doesn't look right or whatever, I can change it. Or I can add other ones. I can download ones like we've done before. So I can continue to add almost like this muddy texture by continuing to paint along this area, which is going to darken what this looks like, right? So I want to kind of paint more in there. It looks more of a natural way of making this river, right? So it's going to be more muddy, right? There we go. Muddy. You notice how that is, right? And it's kind of, you know, kind of a muddy area that I can have my river going on, right? Let's move it around and paint it on this side. And zoom in. And we're going to paint it over here. Right, so we got kind of more strength inside this area here. You can see that now we've got more of a texture around our river, right? A riverbed. Let's play the character to see how it looks. This is always what we should do. We should always see what this looks like. It should look like a big depression now, look, and a little bit different than over here, right? If it's not enough, we should paint more. If I fall into the river, I can see now that I'm inside this river area. This is how deep I would be, right? And I can see that it's, you know, I can go down into it and climb out of it or whatever. That's what the river would look like, right? If I was going to make this kind of, ooh, there's a big deep depression in the river, right? Which some things, what rivers do, right? But it's kind of cool. I can walk around now and I can have this kind of thing happen. Okay, cool. And again, if you don't like this thing or if you want to make it stronger, you can certainly change these settings. Like, for example, if I want to make the opacity higher, let's make the opacity 10 or something like, you know, double what it was. And if as I draw, it's going to make this thing a lot more pronounced, right? A lot darker, right? But you don't want to go too crazy because it's an iterative process, like I said, right? You want to make it so that it's more natural. Okay, cool. So we've got an area that's kind of a riverbed that we're going to add in there, which is this rocky, muddy, you know, area, hilly area. Let's see if there's any other textures I can add in just to make it more a little bit different. So I'm going to add a texture again. I want to click Select, right? And I got some other ones. I've got my, I'm going to use some of these where it says Atlas. Broadleaves are for trees. We don't want to use those, right? And if you look through, as we skip down, there's other ones. There's grass frond, right? We don't want to use those. Grass hill, that's good. Grass rocky, right? We can use those too. And grass rocky is a new one. And the reason why I want to use that, grass rocky, is if I want to make things like more mountainy, right? So I want to click that one. And I want to click, I want to add this one in, right? So that'll be the third one. So there's this one, which is muddy. That one's rocky. Let's add another one. Let's add more and more. Add texture. And I'm going to kind of scroll down here. And you can see that there's other ones here. There's sand, albedo. Let's add that one in there too. So we'll make a sandy one too. right? So we'll click add and click add there too. So we have sand, we have some that's a little rocky, and depending on what we want, we can change and add, you know, rocks and stuff in different areas of our river. Let's add the rocky one. We're going to make this way down. Let's turn down the albedo again, way down to like 5. Again, we want to iterate, which means we want to almost like paint on top of the paint so it looks more natural. And we want it to see through. The more see-through it is, you know, transparent, we're going to see essences or parts of the other texture underneath it. So we're going to see one texture on top of another texture, almost like one image on top of another one to make it more realistic. That's what we're doing. All right, so let's like kind of go in there and see that. So I kind of zoom in, and so here this one is the next one. This is the third one in, right, that I made. So if you notice, if I start painting with this one now, what I want to do is I want to make it rockier. So this area here will be a little bit more rocky, right? And you can't see it, but it just slightly makes it more shiny and rocky. And notice if I want to make it really more, there's two sides of the texture. If I could go to this one here, which is this rocky one, and if I click edit textures for a second, edit, notice that there's two sides. There's the smoothness, and the other side is the normal. Well, if we have a normal map, we can add that in too. A normal map, maybe remember what it does, it adds almost like a bumpiness. So fake bumpiness, or you know, that it gives the illusion of bumpiness to the ground. I can do that too. Let's see if we have one that makes sense for this, you know, rocky one. So I'm going to click select. And remember, all I want to see is the ones that look like this. If you see something that says normal, right? If I expand this, there's one that says normal. The normal map is what I'm looking for. If there's a normal map for this one, that would be really cool. So I'm going to look down to where it says grass, hill, albedo. And I also have grass, rocky, albedo. That's the one I want. But I want to make this the normal map, right? Well, I can't. I got to be very careful here, ladies and gentlemen, right? If I choose this one to make it grass, rocky, albedo, I don't have a normal. See how I have other ones? I have this mud, rocky normal, right? Mud, rocky normal, which is one I use here. That I can do, right? And an example of that is if I can choose both textures, mud, rocky, albedo, specular, which is the one I already have on there, and mud, rocky normals, I can put that on the other side, but not for this one. This one is a different one, right? So how do I do that? I want to make one. Okay, cool. I like the idea of making one. And where are these textures anyway, right? Well, if you look under environment, if I look at our terrain assets, and if I look under surface textures, they're all here. This is where I'm getting all these textures from. They come with the environment pack. That's the standard assets from here, from Unity, right? So what if I don't have a normal that I want to add on? Well, and I want to make it so that I can see the, you know, what it might look like. Here's like another one, cliff, albedo, specular, a specular, but I don't have a cliff, you know, normal, right? Well, there's some really cool websites that do it for you. So there's an online website that I recommend you go to. Let's go to that website for a second. And I have it here under 305. Do I? How about under HTML5 games? And I have, there's a really cool site for textures. Here it is. And what it does is it makes these textures happen. So if I want to make again normal maps, right? So I'm looking for. I'm certainly had it under here. Create sprite sheets, importer asset store, no, and nothing there. Give me 1 second, and I'll find the link that I have because I'm sure I saved it the other day. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. If not, I can always find it by searching for it. So what I'm looking for is an online normal map creator, right? That's what I really want. So I want to be able to convert what I have into, you know, from a normal map or from a regular map into a normal map. How do I do that? You can do that with Photoshop for sure, but if you're not an artist and if you don't know the technique, it's hard, right? And we don't have a lot of time to be artists in this class, right? So this is the only time when I do the sculpting and stuff. It's like one of the only other times you'll see me do art stuff because we don't have time. We're developers, right? Not because I'm not interested. I love it, right? But it's something that I can't always do. All right, so I'm going to say online, right? Normal map, and let's see. There's one that I see that I see here. This is one of them that I use, It's called Normal Map Online, and it's cpetri.github.io. Okay. I'll leave that up for a second. This is kind of neat. And you know what? I might as well just, I think I saved this already. Where did I put it? Oh, I put it in the wrong place. That's so I already have it saved. It's just in the wrong place. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So this cpetri.github.io normal map online. Well, I want to make a normal map, right? Well, one thing I can do with it is I can load, right, an image, right, and then I can download the result. So this is what the regular map will look like. This is what the normal map will look like. This is what it'll look like on a cube projection. Or I can also make it, instead of a cube, you can choose other things, like, for example, a plane, right? What it'll look like on a plane. There we go. And you can zoom in and see what it looks like to give you a little bit of height, almost like the illusion of texture, right? That's what it really does. Okay, cool. So if that's what it is, but how do I load in my own, right? Because I want to be able to load in my own map. And if you look at the controls here, I can download, and it says I can load my diffuse map. Here's my diffuse map on the right. Let's show you that again. So click on load, and I can choose my diffuse map. Now I know where mine is. It's on desktop. And if I go to Unity projects, and it's COMP305 Winter 2016 3D game demo, under my assets, under my standard assets, under my environment, where I put it, in terrain assets, under my surface textures, whew, lots of places. I have a bunch of other things. Notice that these are PSD files, these other ones, right? So I can't choose them. I can choose anything like a BMP file it'll take right now, but it won't take a PSD file. So PSD is Photoshop, right? So notice that the file format, it won't take a PSD file. So let's leave it there. I know where it is, right? So I want to convert my PSD. Now for this, you need a PSD to whatever it is, ping converter. And luckily, I think Fireworks will do this. Let's see if I can open it with Fireworks. I click Fireworks. Let's see. I'm hoping that it will. And if not, I can always open Photoshop. It just takes up a lot of memory. Okay, if I click on open, I'll do the same little trick here. I'll go to where it is on desktop, under Unity projects, under COMP305, game demo, assets, and I'm going to keep going. Right, so it's going to be under standard assets, under environment, under terrain assets, under surface textures. Now here, notice that they're all clickable, right? And I want to access either both the cliff albedo specular one as well as the grass hill albedo or the grass rocky albedo. Let's do the grass rocky albedo. Let's grab that and open it up. And it tells me this is my pixel dimensions, 512 by 512. I say okay. Here's what it looks like normally. And let's save this as a ping file, a ping image. Let's say file, save as. I'll make another texture. We'll call this grass rocky albedo, right? Ping. It'll be saved in the same area. So it'll be two different ones, the PSD version and the ping version, right? Well, let's make it so that it's different, right? So that we'll call this diffuse. We know which one it is. That's ours. Anything that says diffuse on it. And save. And we'll do the same thing for the other one. So press file open. And then when we look in there, so we've got our grass rocky albedo diffuse. That's ours. And we'll do our cliff albedo specular open here. That's nice. I like that texture. It's nice for our rocks, right? But I want to get some texture, a normal map associated with this. We need that. So let's do file, save as, and we'll do this cliff albedo specular. We'll just add the diffuse on there. Diffuse. Cool. Now I've got files I can open, right? Now I can close Fireworks down. I don't need that anymore. Up here, let's do the same thing on load. And oh man, what the hell? I gotta go down here again to desktop. Let's go to desktop, Unity projects. I'm gonna go to COMP305, swim through it all. Assets, thank you. Standard assets, environments, terrain assets, surface textures. There we go. Now you notice the other ones are available too. The cliff albedo specular diffuse that we made. Let's click on that one first. That's the cliff face, and press open. Takes a second, and now you're going to see what it looks like over here, right? So that's loads over on this side, but what about on this side? I want to kind of load the picture, right? Some pictures, but I want to kind of get the idea of what this looks like. How do I load it over here, right? And it says normal maps from photos, how to do it. You know, it tells me how to put things together from photos and whatever, but I want to load this up. What do I do? How do I load this picture? Well, here's where we loaded here on this side, but here's what I want to load up here. And if you notice on the bottom, which is normal map, right? This is what it's going to save as and what the opacity is going to be, right? Here's my displacement, now my normal, my ambient occlusion map, my specular map. It'll do them all, right? But we have to be able to, you know, load these things up somehow, right? Could it be that I can drag and drop? It says click or drag and drop. Well, here's click. If I click on my cliff albedo specular diffuse, right? So I'm going to do that. It opens it up. Now look what it does. It actually creates my specular map here, or my normal map. Guys and girls, please be careful. This is the highest level, right? And what we want to do is be subtle, because this is our example. If I look in here, you don't want it to be too crackly, right? Like this is way too much. If it combines this one plus this one to make this one, right? Yeah, want to be careful, right? So what we can do here is we can play with these numbers up here, the strength and the level. Let's bring that level way down, all right? And I mean like way down, like something like, you know, closer to 1. Right? If you notice, as I go closer, the level, what happens over here, right? If I bring the level up, what happens to this thing over here? It gets brighter, right? So the brighter it is good, but also makes it a lot choppier, right? If I make it a 10. I don't make it too bright, but I don't want to make it too dark. That's too dark, right? So something in middle where it was at 8 approximately, that's okay. What about this strength? What did this do? So if I bring the strength way up, it makes it too rocky. If I bring the strength down, notice I can also make it negative, right, or 1, or 0.01. I want to bring it as low as possible. I want to give it a little bit of shine to it. Take a look. Gives a little bit more rockiness to it, right? So you can see what it looks like. That's what the plane will look like. But not so much. Like that's maybe too much rock, right? And you can check this out by reducing the strength of these things a little bit lower, right? Blur and sharp. Again, that makes it either blurry or sharp, more sharp, right? And what I'm doing here is I'm adding this rocky quality to this, to what I see on my cliff face. Again, we don't want to do too much. We want to reduce it as much as possible. And there's different filters you can use. You can use this Sobel filter or the Scar filter. Scar filter makes it a little bit more pronounced in some ways, right, to make it more specular. Now, and this is the example of what it's going to look like. So this is our normal map, all right? And you notice that there isn't, see this like line here, which is the scar that goes down. I don't see that here. And I'd like to see that more, right? Which means I'm going to increase this a little bit more, right? The more I increase it, though, be careful because it makes it so that it's unrealistic. It adds too much detail. So something lower is better. As I go up, it becomes more pronounced and to the point where you can't see anything except for bumps. It becomes almost like a scraggly rock, right? So lower is better. We want to move right to the lowest, very, very low level, like 0.18, something like that. This level, again, is the brightness. So I can kind of move our brightness away or up, depending on how much I want to see that stuff in between. I want to kind of make it so that it's kind of more on the purple side, more on the closer to the right. And to the left makes it too dark, and it moves things around. So kind of anywhere around where it was before, 8. Blur and sharp, notice how it's -5. As I go to the right, it becomes more sharp. As I go to the left, it becomes more blurry, right? I want to kind of keep it kind of in the middle. So around, 1 would be fine. Nothing too crazy on that side. I can invert colors, right? I can change some of the way it looks, the reds and the greens. I can do some different things. I can add, if I click height, it'll make it also a height map, which is a little different than the normal map, right? And you can see the differences. Okay, I think this is good, these settings, and again, you can play with this again. You may have to do this a couple times or more. I'm going to click download and see this thing is what it's going to be called. I'm going to click on download for now and rename it. Notice how it comes in as normal map, and I got to swim to where it's supposed to be, right? Which sucks. Let's do that. Too bad these things just don't work the way you know they should be. So desktop, again, Unity projects, right? So I'm going to go back into COMP305, game demo, assets, standard assets, environment, terrain assets, surface textures, and I want to name this what I had before. Remember, this was this cliff albedo specular diffuse. So I want to click on this one, but instead of making it diffuse, just rename this to normal. A normal map, right? And click on save. Okay, I can do the other one, but I'm not going to do the other one just because of time, right? Because we're kind of almost in the middle of the first hour. The first hour is done, but I want to see my cliff albedo specular normal. I want to see what that looks like with our cliffs. Let's go back to Unity and see what it's done. Well, as soon as we do that, you can see that the normal map is in purple, just like it was before. It identifies what these things look like. Here's the cliff albedo specular diffuse, and here's the cliff albedo specular normal. If I go back to terrain, I don't have that texture in here. I want to add it in. I click Edit Textures, Add Texture, right, for my cliff. Let's click Select. And on this side, I'm going to click. I know it's something with cliff, and I can filter. So instead of looking through it, I can go cliff albedo specular diffuse. This one on this side, and on this side, I can select. And I can filter it again, cliff, and click normal. Now be careful. This is a dramatic effect on what it does, right? Okay, click away, and notice the size, 15 by 15. That's how it repeats. Again, we can play around with this. Smoothness is another thing, how smooth it is. We'll leave it by default what it is and click Add. So now I've got this other texture that I want to put in here. Okay, there's my other texture. Okay, before I paint my texture, I want to paint some cliffs, right? And I got to go back to this raise lower control over here on the left. Let's try this out. So raise lower, and I want to paint some cliffs, let's say over here on the end, right? Not near where my player is, over here, right? So I want to zoom into that area so I have more control, right? As opposed to, you know, us guessing what it's going to look like. I want to get as close to the area as possible that I'm going to paint, so I know what I'm looking at. So again, I'm going to click this, and then I've got a big brush. And again, I'm going to be very careful. My brush size is 100. My opacity is 5. I can make my brush size smaller if I want, but just not too close to the river, but into the river. I want to start painting this area up a little bit. Just a little bit. And again, just little bumps that I'm going to paint around it, right? And just build up this cliff face slowly, slowly. Right? So first I'm going to build it in terms of height, and then I'm going to make it a little bit sharper. And for the sharper pieces that I'm going to build in the cliffs, remember, don't worry about the texture. The texture is wrong right now, right? For the texture that I want to add in here, as an example, what I want to do is I want to change my brush. Let's use this kind of a spattery brush, right? That makes it a little bit more rocky. So I kind of add a little bit of this hilly stuff. And if that's too much, I can make it so that there's more of a pattern of this rocky stuff on the top. And if it's too much, I'm going to go to the one we haven't touched before, which is the third one in from the left, which is smooth height. And I want to change my brush back to this one. But what I can do is, as I brush this one on, and notice that my opacity is 5 here. If I want to make it even smoother, I can draw my opacity up. I can smooth the height. If I made a mistake, I can always smooth this down again. Right? So that's just a little bit smoother. See how it's slowly, slowly, as I draw, right, it smooths this area out a little bit more. And if I'm not happy with this, again, I can always go back to here with a different kind of brush, right? And again, there's different kinds, like this one, or more of a round one, and just bring some of those areas up so that it doesn't look as unnatural, right? Remember, I want to make a cliff, right? Some kind of rocky outcropping, and it can't be that big, right? That's too much, actually. And remember, I can always press Shift-Click to reduce areas that I find are too much, right? There we go. So I got one little peak there, and everything else is kind of a rocky area. It's already got some texture, but I'm going to add even more by texture painting. I'm going to go back to Texture Paint, flick on my new texture over here that I created, and then now with the things the way there, see my opacity is 18. That's really big. I'm going to turn that right down to 5 again, and then start slowly brushing this area around. And you can see how different it's going to look, because Now, not only is it going to look rocky, but it's going to have this rocky-like, you know, albedo and normal area to make it more rocky-like. This whole area. Like I'm going to keep drawing and adding this different effect to make it more and more hill-like. Okay, so if I zoom in, right, and if I look around, you can see how this looks. And I want to zoom around from the other side to see what it looks like. And again, I'm going to continue to drop. So let's just choose this brush again and brush, 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 brush. Right? And if it seems too subtle for you, don't worry about it. Really. You want it to be subtle. You don't want it to be like dramatic, right? It's got still some of the green part of the whole hill that I painted as a default, that default hill color. But I'm adding more. And if I really want to make it more in some areas, I can increase the brush, the opacity. Like for example, on the top, I want to make it a little bit shinier. I can patch this area and make it even more shiny, right? If I want to add some other aspects to it, like for example, I want some of it to be this other color, right? I can just touch upon areas that I want to be a little darker, right? So then I can add those areas in there as well to make that as more realistic as I like, right? There we go. So we got this rocky area here, which is definitely different looking than this piece, and different than everything else. Yay, cool. Let's add some water, and then we'll stop for a break, right? So water effects are a little bit weird, right? You got to think about what water is when I make it watery, right? How do I make it watery first of all? So here's my area that I want to make, right? And remember what we did was this area here, right? This area here that we got is cool, but I want to add in some water, right? Now, do I have a water texture that I could use? That's the other question. Like, you know, do I want to add a water effect? How about something else? How about if I go something like right-click and I go 3D object, and if I look at some other things here, I got some, you know, cylinder, my plane, my quad, my terrain. Here's my terrain. There's nothing that says water, right? It's not like I could add a water type effect, so to speak, right? So what do? I mean, if I look at this one, this is trees. This one here is paint trees, just like we did before, which we haven't got to. We'll get there in a second. I click on this one. This is just smooth, right? How do I smooth stuff around in my physics material and so on I can use. By the way, physics material, when I paint with a physics material, I can add things like resistance to my ground, bounce in certain areas when I'm painting, because as I'm painting stuff, I'm also painting, you know, the physics that I want to use, right? Okay, cool. What about in here, right? So if I look at my pixel layer, I have some control about my grass tint and so on, but there's nothing that really says water, right? There's no water-like effects. What about assets? Can I import another package that gives me kind of other kinds of asset-like effects? Or did I miss something in my environment? Like for example, if I go back down to water, is there something else in here that I could use, right? Well, here's water basic. This is water basic. Here's materials, models, and so on. And under here, there's also water, right? Here's my water plane, right? And I'm gonna pull this out so you guys can see this a little bit more. It always comes with it, right? So here's my materials that I have. So it looks like what my materials look like. It's already pre-done for us. Here's my models, and here's a prefab. So there's a Water Pro daytime and a Water Pro nighttime. If I click this Water Pro daytime, this prefab, and drag it onto my scene, right? And if I do a frame select on it, there it is. Right? Looks like this big area here, right? Water Pro daytime. It looks like this. If anything, if you look at this thing, it has Water Pro daytime as a shader. That's what it's adding in. And I have a water script that's attached to it, right? So that's what it does. There's also Water Pro nighttime, but all these shapes like this, right? Water Pro daytime, Water Pro nighttime. There's also models. There's this water plane, right? So what if I do that? If I drag my water plane on, see what that looks like. So there's my water plane. If I frame select it, it looks like this one area here. That's my water plane. That's not really what I want, so let's delete that. But my Water Pro datetime, even though that there's this shape to it like this, right? And notice what it looks like. If I look at the mesh renderer, my mesh renderer, it says cast shadows off. Here's my materials. It looks like what the materials look like right now, my blend probes and everything else, right? Here's my texture size, 256, my clip plane offset, and my reflect layers. I don't want to touch any of this stuff, right? Because this is part of what my water looks like. All this stuff is neat, right? But I want to make it so that it appears over here, right? Okay. Water Pro daytime. Let's move it over. So first of all, we're going to, if you look at where the center is right now, it says 0 by 0 by 0, the transform. Well, how come it's not here with my terrain, right? Because my terrain says 0, 0, 0. And this says 0, 0, 0. I don't understand. If I look at it from the top view, so if I click on this spoke up here, where it says on the Y spoke, I look at it from the top, right? And instead of where it says, see how these little lines come out like this? That's perspective mode. If I click onto it, it becomes ISO mode, right? And if I kind of frame select it, what I can do is I can move it so that it's right here, right? Underneath. Now, if I look at it from, if I go back to perspective mode for a second, and if I look where it is, it's kind of hovering underneath, right? I don't want it to be quite there. What I want it to be is just there. Let me show you what that looks like. So if I zoom in, the water plane is there, and I can see it inside the depression, right? Where I put my water. If I play this thing again, you see what it looks like. I'm not finished yet, but you see that I've got this water area. Look, take a look what it looks like. It looks like this. It looks like there's already water running in the river, right? But it's only in the river. Why? Because it's lower than that 10 height that we're using for our ground level, right? So it looks like that the water's in the river, right? Look how it ends over here. That's really weird, right? Well, I want to make it bigger. This is a neat idea that I have, right? But I want to make it so that it covers the entire grid, right? So I can scale this up. Right now my scale is 16 by 1 by 16. That's how big my water is, right? And by the way, you can't change the 1. It's a water plane, right? That's what it is. So if I move this to something like, instead of 16 by 1 by 16, my place is 50 by 1 by 50. So I go 50. Here's by 50, too big. That looks pretty darn big, right? That's too much water, right? That means like we have a little island inside the water. How about 32 by 32? How big is that? That looks a little better, right? And if I was to grab hold of what that looks like, and I move it around, just to get an idea of how it covers my entire area, you can see that the water now covers everything out inside my scene. Still too big, by the way. Still too big. What's that? I could try 28. I like your idea. Let's do it. It's centered now, so that's okay. You could do 28. It's a little bit better. Let's see what it looks like when we actually play. Do I see that weird effect? Yeah, look at that's kind of like square. How does that make any sense, right? So how do I create this? Take this water plane idea, right? And instead of it being circular, you know, whatever, I can make it into something that's a little bit different, right? Like look at, if you don't notice, the size is 1. My material is water plane daytime, as an example. But I want to make it so that the water, right, is my water. By the way, if I go into it, I mean, it looks like this, right? It looks like I'm inside the lake right here, or the river. And there's some areas that doesn't make any sense. Like over here, it just kind of look weird. And here it looks okay. There's what's going on here? But I don't look like I'm inside the river here. It's not like, it doesn't sound any different, right? It looks like I'm like stepping normally, right? I've got to be able to detect when I'm inside the river. So when I'm stepping, it sounds like splash, 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 as opposed to clump, 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 right? And I can do that if I'm careful. We're not going to go over that today, right? It looks like at least a little bit closer to what it looks like. But over here, if I kind of wander out here, I'm like, whoa, fall out into oblivion, because it's not part of our water plane. So how do I make that plane square. Well, let's handle that when we get back from break.